Hi everyone, it's Katrina. Dakota Raptor. The Dakota Raptor was a dinosaur that was covered with feathers. But don't let that fool you, it was anything but cute. This feathered dinosaur could cut you with its enormous long sickle claw that it used to completely annihilate its enemies. As you may have guessed from this raptor's name, it was discovered in South Dakota. Even though it was a raptor, according to researchers with the University of Kansas Paleontological Institute, it didn't look anything like the raptors you've seen in movies like Jurassic Park. This prehistoric creature was like an oversized chicken mixed with a T-Rex. It stood at a whopping 17 feet tall, making it one of the biggest raptors in the entire world. Besides that, it could run extraordinarily fast, it could jump over huge obstacles, and it was very agile. It also had what were basically grappling hooks on all of its limbs. The Dakota Raptor was capable of grabbing onto its prey with one of these deadly claws, then slicing it to bits. The dinosaur was first discovered in 2005 in what paleontologists have named the Hell Creek Formation. It's the same formation where fossilized remains of the Tyrannosaurus rex, as well as three-horned Triceratops, have been found. The Dakota Raptor walked the Earth about 66 million years ago, and when it stretched its wings, it had a wingspan of 3 feet in total. The only raptor bigger and deadlier than this one is the Utah Raptor, longer by an amazing 6 feet, although the Utah Raptor died out somewhere around 60 million years before the Dakota Raptor came on the scene. So, as far as we know, this massive raptor was the largest of its time, and it was extremely lethal. Ancient elephants. Elephants lived in what is today Israel for somewhere around 1.5 million years before they went extinct. They lived in Israel for so long that when prehistoric humans emerged in the region, they all lived together at the same time. Prehistoric humans, noticing the massive bodies of the elephants would potentially feed large groups of them, began to hunt them. As the early humans got more clever and learned to hunt and perfect their killing tactics, the Middle Eastern elephants were pushed toward extinction. According to Professor Rand Barkai from Tel Aviv University, humans actually hunted and fed on elephants for hundreds of thousands of years. They even developed specific tools just for the purpose of hunting and cooking these creatures. Remember, these weren't modern humans, but very distant relatives to humans that lived over 400,000 years ago. And for that matter, these weren't ordinary elephants. They were prehistoric beasts, over twice as large as any modern elephant on the planet today. They also had straight tusks, unlike modern, curved tusk elephants. You're probably wondering how prehistoric humans could hunt something twice as large as an African elephant. The truth is that they didn't hunt them that often. A single group would only need to hunt 1 or 2 elephants a year. They were so big that the meat would sustain their society for up to 6 months. Archaeologists have compared this to modern Arctic populations who kill just 1 whale a year to support their people through an entire winter. But these animals that were so large didn't reproduce that frequently, which also didn't help their numbers. The flying giraffe. There was once a flying monster known as a pterosaur that was as large as a giraffe. Just picture a giraffe except with a wingspan of some 40 feet and a huge predator's beak. If you've pictured this in your head, what you're looking at is the Quetzalcoatlus. This amazing pterosaur dominated the skies of our planet millions of years ago, but was actually neither bird nor dinosaur. It lived alongside the Tyrannosaurus rex and was the biggest flying creature that ever existed. Scientists remain unsure of how it managed to get its huge body into the air. At least there was some serious skepticism as to whether it could fly, and if it did fly, how it sustained itself with such a massive body. A new group of researchers from the University of Texas, along with a handful of aerospace engineers and biomechanics, studied these smaller fossils of other pterosaurs to try and solve the mystery. They now believe that the Quetzalcoatlus jumped over 8 feet into the air to take flight, like a giraffe jumping clean over your head to get enough lift to stay in the air. But then again, this is just a theory. No one can say for certain how the prehistoric beast managed to get into the air. Whatever the case, it is still the most impressive flying creature of its time, and would have been an incredible sight to see. Hell, heron, and Jurassic mouse. There have been so many animals on our planet that we don't know even a fraction of them. Yet every year, scientists with the Natural History Museum do their best to identify and catalog as many new ancient species as possible. In 2021, they managed to document over 500 new species, including a few that are both terrifying and bizarre. One of them is something called a hell heron, a heron-like bird but with the face of a crocodile. It stalked the Isle of Wight in the UK 125 million years ago. Another unexpected creature, this one still alive, hails from Singapore. It was a cricket identified by scientists only because of its unique song. But the museum also identified a handful of British dinosaurs, almost 300 species of very tiny shrimp, and a prehistoric mouse from the Jurassic era. This mouse scuttled and scurried beneath the stomping feet of the world's biggest dinosaurs in what is today's Scotland, 166 million years ago. The really amazing point here is that scientists are only scratching the surface of the diversity on our planet throughout the ages. Some of the new species they found are still living here today, including 90 new types of beetles, 52 species of wasps, and 13 moths. They also found 5 new types of plants in Africa. And if we don't even know half of the creatures and plants still alive, imagine how many ancient species of monsters and prehistoric creatures we are still yet to discover. The Earth's biggest sea monster. Experts believe that they have finally discovered the most gigantic prehistoric sea monster that ever lived. Paleontologists are saying that it could be the largest known animal of its day. This beast lived 244 million years ago and weighed 40 tons. This creature was a type of ichthyosaur, one that Lars Schmitz from Scripps College in Claremont says had gigantism. Clearly, since it measured around 60 feet long. Of course, it still wasn't as big as a modern blue whale. Blue whales are the biggest creatures that have ever existed on Earth, period. They can grow to over 100 feet long and weigh over 400,000 pounds. Just the tongue of a blue whale weighs more than the average elephant. But this ichthyosaur was pretty close, with its head the size of an adult human. And what makes them so interesting is that they were way faster than whales. They evolved at a time when the planet was still recovering from the horrible extinction at the end of the Permian period that wiped out nearly every living thing. As for what this creature looked like, picture a swimming Komodo dragon mixed with the Loch Ness Monster. That's essentially what the giant ichthyosaur was, a huge lizard with paddle-like fins for swimming around in the ocean. What do you think is more terrifying, the modern great white shark or the prehistoric Komodo dragon/Loch Ness Monster hybrid? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The direwolf. Despite the name, the direwolf was not a wolf. It was its very own species, distinctly different from the gray wolf of today. The prehistoric direwolf, for those who don't know, was a top predator throughout the Americas over 11,000 years ago. We know this because at La Brea tar pits, over 4,000 direwolf remains have been excavated in the past century. It's pretty obvious that there were a lot of these canines running around 11,700 years ago. That was right at the end of the Ice Age. The problem has been that scientists can't seem to agree on much about their evolution, or even why they suddenly disappeared when they were clearly bigger, more ferocious, and more intimidating than the gray wolves that lived at the same time. Using cutting-edge technology, researchers have finally been able to take ancient bones from direwolves and look at their genomes. Using different fossils from between 13,000 and 50,000 years ago, researchers constructed the evolutionary history of the carnivore for the first time ever. What's really significant is that they found no evidence of mixed genes between direwolves, ordinary wolves, or coyotes. It means the direwolf evolved in isolation, not breeding in any way with other wolves. The best guess scientists have now as to where the animal came from might surprise you. It's believed that direwolves diverged from gray wolves from one common ancestor 5 million years ago. The direwolf then evolved all on its own in America, while wolves and coyotes followed their own family tree in Europe and made it all the way until the end of the Ice Age. Scientists are looking into perhaps bringing the direwolf back from extinction. What do you think? Would you like these giant prehistoric creatures brought back to life? Let me know in the comments below. Want to give a big shout out to The Enigma and Richie B86. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, welcome, and be sure to subscribe for more videos like these. Monster shrimp. 500 million years ago, there was a gigantic carnivorous shrimp that roamed the seas of the world. It was a top predator during the Middle Cambrian period, growing to an outstanding 3 feet in length. But according to a new study, it may not have been that vicious of a killer, despite its impressive size. Researchers are saying that rather than crunching its prey, it gummed its food to death. When researchers first started studying the monster shrimp, they figured it was a real killer. They thought it roamed the sea, chomping through the shells of trilobites and preying on other creatures. But after looking at the mouth parts of 400 fossils of the shrimp, known scientifically as Anomalocaris, researchers noticed that their mouths were soft. They showed no chipped teeth or broken mouth parts from chomping through shells. The consensus now is that the 3-foot shrimp beast was only capable of gumming its food. It could have feasted on soft-shell crustaceans, but probably not. More realistically, this disturbing little monster spent its time combing through the mud and slurping up worms. Either that, or it may have used the tentacles in its mouth as a filter, slurping plankton straight out of the water, much like whales do today. The giant southern lizard. The Giganotosaurus, also known to some as the giant southern lizard, was one of the biggest carnivorous dinosaurs that ever existed. This beast roamed South America during the late Cretaceous period, but surprisingly, it only lived from between 99.6 to 97 million years ago. It may have been a king among dinosaurs, but its existence was a relative blip on the Earth's timeline. This dinosaur was an absolute beast, no matter how fearsome the T-Rex might have been. The Giganotosaurus was big, strong, and fast. Its strong back limbs with heavy bone structure indicate it probably was a good sprinter, with an estimated cruising speed of 31 miles per hour. In terms of size, the Giganotosaurus was bigger than the T-Rex and smaller than the Spinosaurus. Yet neither of these animals lived in the same place or even at the same time. Plus, the Giganotosaurus is unique. Sure, it was over 43 feet long and 14 tons, but it also had an enormous skull, short arms, and hands with 3 fingers, each tipped with a sharp claw. There is also only one species of Giganotosaurus, which is in stark contrast to things like tyrannosaurs, which there were all kinds of. It's hard to know why it went extinct, but it probably had something to do with its large size, and it might have run out of food at some point and wasn't able to support its appetite. The tallest rhino. In China, researchers have discovered the fossilized remains of a rhinoceros that grew to be taller than a giraffe. The giant rhino species lived roughly 26.5 million years ago on the Tibetan Plateau. Based on the anatomy of its skull, researchers think it looked more like a modern tapir than a rhino, with an extremely short trunk instead of a sharp horn. But still, it was ridiculously tall. This colossal prehistoric creature has been linked directly to the modern rhinoceros, with researchers saying it was really a cousin to the rhino. It weighed roughly 24 tons, heavier than 4 African elephants. Its skull was about 3 feet long, and the average adult stood somewhere around 16 feet at the shoulder. Its neck was then about 7 feet long, bringing the total to over 23 feet. In comparison, giraffes alive today only stand between 14 and 19 feet at the top of their heads. Taking that into consideration, along with the fact that modern rhinos are significantly shorter than giraffes, trying to just visualize this prehistoric creature is enough to present a bit of a challenge. Sadly for us, we will never get to see such a beast in real life. The hornless giant rhinos lived across Central Asia from between 50 million years until 23 million years ago. It's long since extinct and isn't likely to be coming back. The giant pterosaur. In 2013, police raided a shipment of illegal fossils. These fossils came from Brazil, hidden in barrels and loaded onto trucks. The police discovered thousands of limestone slabs containing the fossilized remains of prehistoric creatures that lived millions of years ago. They had been taken from the Araripe Basin and were set to be sold to private collectors and legitimate museums around the world. These fossils would have fetched the sellers thousands of dollars apiece, but instead the police intercepted the illegal export and sent 3,000 fossils to the University of Sao Paulo to be studied. Among the fossils taken by the police was one that really stood out. Researchers at the university identified it as a miniature pterosaur with some of the most intense headgear ever. It was about 4 feet tall, much shorter than the flying giraffe I told you about earlier. But this pterosaur was unique in that it had a huge crest on its head, so big that it could only fly short distances. It basically had a big pointy crown on its head that weighed it down too much to fly properly, almost like an eagle with a giant spike on the top of its head, preventing it from flying much further than tree to tree.
The Trinity test. The Trinity test took place on July 16, 1945. At the time, scientists only had enough weapons-grade uranium to build a single atomic bomb. Many of these scientists also doubted its effectiveness. The world had never before seen a nuclear explosion, and nobody knew how much energy would be released. The site chosen for the test was a remote piece of the Alamogordo bombing range, about 210 miles, 337 kilometers south of Los Alamos. Scientists put up 3 observation bunkers 10,000 yards, 9.1 kilometers from ground zero, to measure the effects of the explosion. At the time, scientists were wildly worried about radioactivity. No one was sure how much radiation would explode from the bomb, and scientists knew there was a good chance that the radiation could gush into the upper atmosphere and then be swept into the surrounding areas. 4 days before the test, the plutonium core was taken to the test area. The non-nuclear components were brought the next day. On the morning of the 16th, scientists were making bets about what would happen. Robert Oppenheimer actually bet $10 that the bomb wouldn't work at all. But of course, the secret Trinity test was an enormous success. At 5:30 a.m., staff members of the Manhattan Project watched as the first atomic bomb exploded over the New Mexico desert. It vaporized the very tower it was launched from, spat a plume of orange and red fire into the sky, and propelled human beings into the nuclear age. The secret iPod. The United States government built their very own secret iPod in one of the most bizarre military projects ever. It began in 2005 when Apple allowed a pair of US contractors to work inside their offices to develop their own custom version of the iPod. But neither Steve Jobs nor anyone else at Apple knew what the military iPod would do. In fact, we still don't know what it was supposed to do. All we know is that the US government definitely did build one. According to former iPod engineer David Shea, he was given a special assignment by the director of iPod software to help the engineers from the US Department of Energy with their version. And here's the thing, the project was kept almost entirely under wraps. There were only 4 people in the company aware of the secret project. This was David, the director of software, the vice president of the iPod division, and the senior vice president of hardware. The military iPod clone was kept top secret, and those working on it were careful that no paper trail was made, with all communications being done in person. David says the government engineers wanted something that looked and worked exactly like a normal iPod. Only for their creation, it had the covert ability to record data and store it inside the iPod in such a way that it could only be detected by someone who knew it was there. Now just wait until you hear what kind of data they were recording. While we don't know for sure, David says he's almost certain they were trying to create a stealth Geiger counter. This means the government made a device for someone to record radioactivity levels while appearing to have nothing except a normal iPod in their pocket. What do you think was the actual purpose of the recording device? A Geiger counter? Something else perhaps? Either way, it's very James Bond-like. The Danube program. In Romania in the 1980s, a secret project known as the Danube program was created, in which the government tried to develop a cache of their own nuclear weapons. The project began in 1981, at a time when pretty much every government on the planet was exploring nuclear weapons and the power they could wield simply by the threat of having them in their arsenal. Unfortunately for Romania, they had an issue. In 1970, they were a socialist republic and had been banned from ever developing or building their own nuclear weapons. But in 1981, they started their own nuclear weapons program anyway, in spite of the ban. They built plutonium extraction facilities, they acquired highly enriched uranium from the United States of America, and they even got a nuclear reactor from the US as well. However, the project was a huge failure. By 1989, Romania's nuclear project was dead in the water. They had succeeded in creating plutonium, but they never managed to make any bombs. That being said, they did gather enough material to make about 240 plutonium bombs. It just turned out to be a lot harder to actually forge that plutonium into an explosive device. The Insectothopter. The Insectothopter is a very good idea in theory if it could actually be executed correctly. For anyone who's watched the movie Dune, you'll recognize the Insectothopter as the science fiction device that was used to fly around on the desert planet of Arrakis. Essentially a military jet that can fly with the efficiency of a dragonfly. The CIA tried to develop something remarkably similar, except that it would only weigh 1 gram and would be used for spying purposes. And yet the CIA failed so epically that their silly little Insectothopter couldn't even withstand a light breeze. The device was designed back in the 1970s to be part robot, part dragonfly, and all spy machine. It had a tiny engine that could move its wings up and down, allowing it to fly for very short periods. The issue was that crosswinds rendered the thing useless. Too much wind caused instability. It was impossible to control the Insectothopter, and it didn't quite turn out the way the CIA had hoped. The device had a range of 600 feet, 182 meters, and it should have been the perfect tool for espionage. Had it worked as designed, it could have been launched from a window, from a moving car, or anywhere else, and then piloted to the target. And since it looked just like a dragonfly, nobody would have even known. But alas, the idea was defeated by the unpredictable nature of wind. Do you think the CIA has since developed anything similar that remains a secret? After all, technology has taken quite a few leaps forward since the 1970s. Communist killer dolphins. Iran may or may not have a fleet of killer communist dolphins. And no, this isn't the plot of some strange new spy flick. According to the BBC, the Islamic Republic acquired a small number of dolphins from Russia in the year 2000. These dolphins had already been specially trained by the Russians to attack enemy ships in open water. They had actually been trained as a part of the Soviet Union, but when the Union collapsed and the funding evaporated, the dolphins were moved to an aquarium with their former trainer. When visitors stopped going to this specialized dolphin trainer's aquarium, he began running out of money. He had no more cash to take care of the dolphins, so he convinced Iran to buy them to use for their own covert military operations. But just what kind of things were these dolphins able to do? I mean, it's a dolphin, right? How much trouble could a small fleet of dolphins possibly be to an enemy? Well, you'd be surprised. These were some very special dolphins with some very unique skills. They were trained to kill enemy underwater soldiers using harpoons that were attached to their backs. They were also trained to be suicide bombers. They could swim up to the hulls of enemy ships with explosive sea mines strapped to their bodies. And even more amazingly, the dolphins were taught to know the difference between the propulsion system of a Russian submarine and an American submarine. How do you feel about so many militaries using dolphins as weapons of war? Let me know your thoughts on the communist killer dolphins in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe before the end of the video. The Air Force's secret space plane. The Air Force designed their very own secret space plane, the X-37B. The plane orbits at low altitudes. Most of its missions are kept top secret, and as far as the Air Force is concerned, information regarding this unique aircraft is not to be discussed. It's launched from Cape Canaveral in Florida, with no flight plan information given to the public, and then it hangs out in space for a bit before coming back down. It's one of the most secretive planes in action today. But there is one thing we do know that it does. The X-37B goes on missions into orbit to drop off satellite payloads and carry out mysterious jobs. Most recently, the US Naval Research Laboratory used the X-37B to carry a 1 square foot solar panel into space. That solar panel is designed to convert solar radiation into normal DC current that we use here on Earth. The mission goal was to turn the DC current into microwaves. The microwaves would then be sent by a cable to a box where the energy would be measured. According to Paul Jaffe, an electronics engineer working with the research lab, this is the first time such a thing will be done in space. And if you're wondering what the whole point of it is, the US is hoping that the project is the first step in a brighter future. They hope to generate power from the sun in space and then send it to the ground. Sneaky and secretive? Sure, but apparently also serving to bring us closer to green and renewable energy. What do you think the secret Air Force spacecraft is also up to up there? Spear attack in the Congo. In the 1960s, the United States was not keen on minding their own business. There was political upheaval and civil war in what is today the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and the US was spying on them by sending reconnaissance missions over the country and sometimes over missionary outposts. These missions were supposed to be to ensure that everyone was okay, but in 1964, one of their reconnaissance planes came under attack by a group of natives on the ground. The natives didn't attack the aircraft with machine guns or grenade launchers. Instead, they were throwing spears at the airplane. The pilot of the reconnaissance aircraft was nearly downed by a long piece of wood with a sharp stick attached to it. In the end, this was probably the only slightly humorous thing to come out of the crisis in the Congo. After years of colonial abuse and a horrible mutiny, the Congo became the scene for proxy warfare between militias backed by the US and Soviets. Even today, the Democratic Republic of the Congo is one of the most dangerous places in the world, continually plagued by nearly constant warfare. Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book was the code name given for the study of unidentified flying objects by the United States Air Force. They did this from March of 1952 to December of 1969. There were two goals for the project leaders. The first was to determine if UFOs really were a threat to the United States of America. The second goal was to scientifically analyze all UFO data to see if aliens really were visiting the planet. The US Air Force put together over 100,000 pages of documents, sifting through just about every UFO report that had come out. This massive amount of data collection and analysis all started with just one man in 1947. Kenneth Arnold was a businessman and a respected pilot. He was flying over Washington state when he witnessed a small group of unidentified flying objects. He later described these objects as skipping through the sky like saucers. This is where the term flying saucers originally came from. The media loved it so much that the term stuck. That same year, in 1947, a UFO was rumored to have landed in Roswell, New Mexico. These two events, with such public and media interest, convinced the Air Force to open up Project Blue Book. In the almost 20 years the project was active, a small group of researchers stationed at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio investigated 12,618 UFO sightings. What was the final consensus of the project? That's really hard to say. Some of the cases they investigated are unexplainable. Much of the information that's been released to the public is illegible because so much has been redacted. While it's impossible to say if the researchers proved the existence of aliens, they definitely didn't disprove them either. CIA mind control. During the Cold War, the CIA was obsessed with mind control. Between the 1950s and the early 1960s, they began a secret program that most people are probably aware of by now. This program was MK Ultra. It was created and managed by a chemist by the name of Sidney Gottlieb. Many of his experiments were funded at universities across the country, while some were even conducted in American prisons and in detention centers internationally. These were in places like the Philippines and Japan. The subjects were usually unaware, having no idea what kind of torture they were about to be put under. And a lot of this torture, what the CIA would probably prefer to be called experiments, involved alarmingly high doses of LSD and even electroshock therapy. Sidney Gottlieb did everything in his power to try and master mind control. According to him, this required two parts. First was to completely extinguish the existing mind, with the second part being to insert a new mind. The researchers never did get far on the second part, but they definitely did the first part extremely well. Using LSD, they succeeded in abolishing plenty of people's minds. They just never managed to insert a new, controllable mind in the abolished one's place. After over a decade of dedicated research, mind control just proved too impossible of a thing, and those who were experimented on against their will or without their consent were left to suffer the consequences of Gottlieb's failed attempts. Have you heard of MK Ultra? What do you think about the theories Gottlieb had about using drugs to make a person's mind or personality controllable? Stealing Soviet missile data. During the Vietnam War, the Soviet SA-2 missile was devastating US Air Forces. So the CIA came up with a secret project to steal the technology behind the missile and disable one of the Soviet Union's most annoying and destructive weapons. To do this, they created a fleet of suicide drones. Then in February of 1966, they set the drones up to be destroyed. One of them flew a high-altitude mission over Vietnam, bound for Hanoi to do reconnaissance. The North Vietnamese picked up the drone's location and sent an SA-2 missile to destroy it. Within just a few seconds, the drone was turned into a ball of fire and the mission was complete. On the outside, it looked like the North Vietnamese shooting down yet another reconnaissance drone. But in reality, the drone had been recording all the details of the missile that killed it. It secretly recorded the missile's radar tracking information, analyzed its guidance system, and even got a look at its warhead, specifically at the detonation system of the warhead. In the 200 milliseconds before the drone exploded, it sent all this information to the CIA. The information picked up by the secret spy drone was enough that the Air Force could create a jammer system, a literal electronic field that prevented SA-2 missiles from exploding. It was a huge success. The Air Force was able to rig up a drone with their jammer system, and it was able to deflect 7 SA-2 missiles. In 1965, the SA-2 missile destroyed 1 aircraft for every 4 missiles fired. But after the mission in 1967, it took at least 50 missiles to destroy a single aircraft.
Roman child's coffin. A mysterious coffin from over 1,600 years ago was just opened by scientists for the first time. It was part of an effort to learn more about life and death in ancient Britain when it was occupied by the Romans. The coffin is particularly fascinating because it was found to carry the body of a child. The coffin was made completely of lead, discovered buried in the middle of a field in Witherley. Before they opened the coffin, scientists used an endoscope to look inside. Unfortunately, they couldn't see much of anything because the coffin was filled with clay silt. Finally, they pried the lid off the coffin and looked at the remains of the child inside. While unable to immediately tell the gender, a pair of shale black bracelets makes experts think it was a young girl. For now, analysis is still ongoing to see who this child was and how they ended up in this mysterious grave in the 4th century AD. But in the meantime, Stuart Palmer with Archaeology Warwickshire took a public poll to name the girl. She is now called Oriens, as voted by over 1,800 people online. The Hatshepsut Mummy Mystery. Archaeologists have used a missing tooth to identify the mummy of the most legendary female leader and pharaoh in ancient Egyptian history. Cleopatra? Not her. Instead, it is Hatshepsut, the woman who reigned over all of Egypt 3,000 years ago. According to Zahi Hawass, the leading archaeologist in Egypt, the discovery of Hatshepsut's mummy is the most important discovery in Egyptology since the Valley of the Kings. He even called it one of the greatest adventures of his lifetime. But this should come as no surprise. Hatshepsut is one of the most famous Egyptian pharaohs ever. She ruled for 15 years and was the second woman to ever ascend to the throne. She was the daughter of Thutmose I and married her brother Thutmose II. And while that might strike you as odd, it was pretty standard procedure in a lot of ancient societies. When her husband/brother died, she went on to rule in his place and remained on the throne. But here's the thing, ancient Egyptian men didn't really appreciate ladies in power like other ancient societies. After her death, her son, Thutmose III, did all he could to remove every trace of her from history. That's what made it so difficult to discover her mummy. When Howard Carter opened her tomb in the Valley of the Kings back in 1902, he found her sarcophagus empty. No one could identify her body for the next 100 years. Finally, Mr. Hawass was able to connect Hatshepsut's mummy to the mummy found in a random tomb called KV60. But even though he was able to properly identify the great pharaoh, we still can't figure out why she was buried in a totally random tomb rather than in her own. Himera. During the expansion of a railway line at the site of an ancient Greek city called Himera, workers stumbled upon something unfathomable. They found a mass graveyard with over 12,000 untouched bodies from both the archaic and classical periods. Many of these corpses were buried with special grave goods. Some may have even participated in an ancient battle fought between the Greeks and the Carthaginians in 480 BC. At the end of the battle, the Greeks came out the victors. They went on to erect the Temple of Victory in celebration, but then, in 409 BC, Carthage took their revenge. They attacked the city with extreme prejudice and burnt it to the ground. Archaeologists believe the massive graveyard they found probably contains thousands of bodies belonging to the men who fell during this battle. What's really bizarre is that they were arranged in long rows, 50 skeletons to a line. But archaeologists also found graves they can't identify. They found skeletons of newborns placed inside terracotta pots, bodies covered with sand, bodies put in wooden coffins, and dead men stuffed in stone sarcophagi. They found over 40 buried horses that may have been involved in the battle, as well as heaps of dead people that may have had nothing to do with the battle. It seems the graveyard was used extensively during the city's history, but only until the place was torn down by the Carthaginians. An ancient henge. An ancient ceremonial complex the size of Stonehenge was recently found in England on the North Downs. It too is a Neolithic henge, though the purpose of the site is currently shrouded in mystery. Archaeologists found piles of burned bones, scraps of pottery, and other evidence to suggest it was used for ritual ceremonies for over 2,000 years. It was built as far back as 2500 BC, or 4,500 years ago. This was right at the end of the Stone Age. The way in which the ceremonial complex was found is pretty amazing. Paul Wilkinson of Kent Archaeological Field School found the first clue when looking at satellite images of the area. He saw a circular mark that didn't quite look like it belonged. He took his team of archaeologists to the site and began digging, and they discovered a henge over 150 feet wide. The enormous earthwork consists of a main circular area, an outer ditch, and entrances at the east and west. The size of the henge is preposterous. It would have taken a significant amount of time just for the Stone Age people to clear the land to make room for the enormous stones. Adding to the mystery is the fact that not a single sign of habitation has been found anywhere near the circle. Also, the burned remains of human bones have been found, suggesting cremations had taken place at the site. And because of its peculiar place in the hills, people standing in the henge would only have been able to see the sky. The landscape for miles would have been completely blocked from view. Wilkinson says it would have been like looking into a void of space. Because the discovery is so new and so little of it remains, archaeologists are struggling to figure out who built it and for what purpose. What do you think the henge was for? Religious rituals? Stargazing? Tell me your theories in the comments. Secret Scythian treasure. Over 130 years ago, a Polish farmer made an astonishing discovery in a barren field outside the town of Wyczaskowo. Completely by accident, he stumbled upon an extensive hoard of treasure, including dozens of gold ornaments dating back over 1,400 years. Apparently, despite evidence that the discovery was made at that time, all further knowledge of the treasure hoard was lost, and the location remained a mystery. That's not to say that people didn't look for it. Treasure hunters scoured the area all the way through World War II, but it wasn't until 2001 that investigators finally figured it out. When they uncovered the exact location, they beheld a treasure trove like nothing ever seen before. It was a hoard of artifacts left behind by the ancient Scythians. Pounds and pounds of mainly animal-themed artifacts crafted in gold. These artifacts included figures of panthers, lions, deer, fish, vultures, and other animals. Archaeologists identified golden discs that were once part of a breastplate, pendants, jewelry, and so much more. But the mystery has never been solved. While archaeologists believe it was left behind by the Scythians, they don't know why they would have abandoned such treasure in a field. Plus, no other signs of them have been found in the area. The treasure is a total anomaly. For those who don't know who the Scythians were, they were a nomadic race descended from Iranians who migrated from Central Asia into Russia and Eastern Europe. Their powerful empire spread all the way into what is now Crimea. They were known for their skills as horsemen and warriors. They were also famous for their ferocious female warriors. Many people believe the Scythians were actually the inspiration for the Amazonian warrior women of legend, carved for the gods. A waterlogged ditch in England yielded a rather unexpected discovery. During the construction of some roadwork back in July, workers found an old piece of wood. They first dismissed it as a piece of garbage. But when one of them took a closer look at it, they realized the wood had been carved into the shape of a human. It was a figurine, one of a man dressed in a tunic and wearing an unusual hat. Archaeologists believe it was the lack of oxygen in the trench that allowed the wooden figure to stay preserved for over 2,000 years. Its exact purpose and origin are unknown, though experts believe it may have been carved as an effigy of a god, perhaps some sort of religious offering. And this isn't a small figure. It stands 26 inches tall and is missing half its body. That means it was probably at least 4 feet tall when it was first made. The figure has been dated back to the 1st century, to a time when Rome ruled all of Britain. But other than that, nobody knows a single thing about it. Who do you think carved this mysterious giant figure, and for what purpose? Let me know any theories you have in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries. Rare bionic armor. In a Chinese burial, archaeologists have found a rare piece of bionic armor dating back 2,500 years ago. It's the second ancient armor of its kind ever found, so rare that archaeologists could hardly believe their eyes when they pulled it from the grave. The bionic armor is made of over 5,000 leather scales, crafted intricately in an overlapping design so they look like the scales of a fish. It looked kind of like a waistcoat. It could be thrown on quickly and without help, and was even one size fits all. And while it's obviously not bionic and that it was worn by a cyborg, researchers say it's one of the earliest examples of a technology that got its inspiration from nature. The scientific director involved in the study, Makey Wagner, says the fish scale design was probably extremely efficient for defending against all kinds of attacks. It would have easily deflected arrows, could have stopped the thrust of a sword, and would have dampened the powerful blow of an axe. The armor was made of approximately 5,444 small scales and 140 large scales. All of them were woven together with leather laces and lining. It really shows that even thousands of years ago, Chinese warriors were miles ahead of their counterparts in Europe. Ancient stone board game. Researchers in Oman have discovered a mysterious stone board game created 4,000 years ago. The board is enormous, with marked fields and cup holes. Researchers with the Polish Center of Mediterranean Archaeology made the amazing find near the small village of Ain Bani Saida. This was the same location where they found an ancient Bronze Age settlement with evidence of copper smelting. But it's really the board game that got all the attention. Researchers say these games were a huge part of cultural activities thousands of years ago, kind of like how video games are a huge part of modern culture today. But finding actual board games is rare, with very few examples having already been uncovered from India through Mesopotamia and all the way to the Eastern Mediterranean. Even though the researchers have the physical board in their hands, they still don't know how it worked. There were likely small pieces used, similar to chess or the tokens used in modern board games. However, what the purpose of the game was, what the rules were, or any notion of how to play it, remains lost to time. Tombs of a wealthy Chinese clan. The mysterious tombs of a wealthy clan have been discovered in central China after 2 years of extensive excavations. The cemetery in which the tombs were discovered is 3,000 years old, located at the archaeological site of Anyang in the Henan province. The clan, known only as Se, were active during the Shang dynasty. In total, archaeologists found over 18 building foundations, 24 tombs, 4 chariot pits used for burying horses, and dozens of remarkable relics. They found stone artifacts, jade treasures, and bronzeware items inscribed with the name of the clan. Sadly, the largest and most important tomb in the entire cemetery had been plundered and robbed. Almost nothing remained inside, with all of the artifacts coming from smaller tombs. Still, judging by all of the treasure that remained, even after grave robbers pillaged the area, archaeologists believe the clan must have been extremely wealthy. Very little is known about them, but they appear to have vanished around 1046 BC at the end of the Shang dynasty and the beginning of the Bronze Age in China. The cemetery was used for many centuries, but was abandoned at the same time the clan disappeared. Rare Viking sword. A very rare Viking sword was discovered inside a grave on a small Scottish island. The Viking sword was left behind sometime in the 9th century, buried on one of the Orkney Islands. Even more mysterious is that the sword was taken from a hidden cemetery tucked away on the northeast coast. Andrew Morrison of AOC Archaeology says it's one of the most exciting artifacts he's ever seen, and probably has many ancient stories to tell. But we don't know these stories just yet. Scientists were able to identify it as a Type D sword, which was the heaviest weapon used by the Vikings. Imagine a great big claymore that requires massive strength just to wield. That's how big this monster weapon was. It needed a huge hilt to stabilize it. In all of Europe, only about 30 of these swords still survive. Half were recovered in Norway, a few were found in Ireland, and the rest were discovered throughout Poland and Russia. This is the first time that one has been found so far away in Scotland. The real mystery is trying to figure out who wielded the sword over 1,000 years ago. It was discovered lying on the chest of a corpse. A Viking warrior who must have been an absolute beast to use such a heavy sword in battle. He was likely part of a team of explorers or adventurers who wandered to the furthest reaches of Scotland and tried to settle on the outer islands. Thanks for watching! Which of these mysterious archaeological discoveries fascinated you the most? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon! Bye!